Australia, a country blessed with sunshine, beaches, vast natural resources, and one of the highest standards of living in the world. For decades, Australians have proudly referred to their nation as the lucky country. But is Australia still the lucky country? Or is the luck beginning to run out? In this video, we'll explore why Australia became one of the world's most successful nations, why many Australians no longer feel prosperous, and whether the next generation will inherit the same opportunities their parents enjoyed. Most Australians assume the phrase, the lucky country, was a compliment. It wasn't meant to be. The phrase was coined by Australian writer Donald Horne in 1964, and he wasn't praising Australia. In fact, he was criticising it. Horne argued that Australia had become wealthy largely because of good fortune rather than exceptional leadership. The country had abundant land, abundant minerals, a small population, and inherited British institutions that functioned reasonably well. Australia, according to Horne, was lucky because it kept winning, despite not always making particularly brilliant decisions. So more than 60 years later, that observation remains surprisingly relevant. Now, let's start with the good news. Australia remains one of the most successful countries on Earth. If you were randomly born somewhere in the world today, Australia would be one of the best places you could land. Let's consider the advantages. Australia possesses enormous reserves of iron ore, coal, natural gas, lithium, rare earth minerals, and abundant agricultural farmland. Many countries spend centuries fighting wars over resources, but Australia simply sits on them in the most isolated and naturally protected part of the world. Which brings us to Australia's geography. Australia enjoys something that most nations would envy: distance. A natural barrier which means no hostile armies are gathering on its borders, no neighbouring superpowers are threatening invasion, and there are no centuries-old territorial disputes with other countries. For much of modern history, Australia has enjoyed a level of security that many countries can only dream about. Then, there are Australia's institutions. While political debates can be heated, Australia remains a stable democracy with an independent judiciary, functioning elections, and relatively low levels of corruption. Compared with many parts of the world, that is a remarkable achievement. By almost every international measure, Australia remains wealthy, stable, and free. So, why are so many Australians feeling pessimistic? Ask most Australians under 40 what keeps them awake at night, and the answer is probably housing. For much of Australia's history, home ownership was achievable for ordinary workers such as a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, and a tradesperson. In the past, these jobs could realistically support a family and buy a home. Today, that dream feels increasingly distant. House prices in Sydney and Melbourne have reached levels that would have seemed absurd just a generation ago. Many young Australians now face a choice: move far from employment centres, rent indefinitely, or rely on family assistance to enter the property market. This has created a growing divide. Older Australians who purchased property decades ago have often accumulated enormous wealth. Meanwhile, younger Australians face much higher barriers to entry. The result is a growing sense that the economic ladder has become much harder to climb. Australia may still be wealthy, but wealth and opportunity are not always the same thing. Now, we arrive at what many economists consider Australia's biggest long-term challenge: productivity. And yes, I know, the word productivity sounds about as exciting as reading an instruction manual for a washing machine. But stay with me. Productivity simply means producing more value from the same amount of labour and resources. Historically, rising productivity made Australians richer, so that workers became more efficient, businesses became more innovative, the economy produced more goods and services, and wages generally increased. But in recent years, productivity growth has slowed dramatically. This matters because there are only so many houses you can build, only so much iron ore you can export, and only so many people you can add through immigration. The irony is, continued prosperity depends on becoming more productive. And when productivity stalls, living standards tend to stall as well. And that's exactly what many Australians are beginning to experience. Take the example of Australia's mining industry, which has been one of the greatest economic success stories in modern history, particularly during China's extraordinary rise over the last half-century. As China built cities, railways, factories, and infrastructure. It needed enormous quantities of raw materials, and Australia supplied many of them. The result was a mining boom that generated enormous national wealth. But there is a question that many Australians ask themselves, and that is, have we become too dependent on digging things out of the ground? Critics argue that Australia has become too comfortable relying on commodity exports, rising house prices, and population growth rather than focusing on innovation, technology, advanced manufacturing, and productivity improvements. To be clear, mining is not the problem, since mining has essentially made Australia richer. The concern is whether Australia has diversified enough to prosper if global conditions change, because history teaches us that commodity booms do not last forever. Perhaps the most important question is this: will today's young Australians enjoy a better life than their parents? Because, for most of Australia's modern history, the answer was obvious: yes. Each generation generally became wealthier than the one before it, which gave rise to larger homes, better education, higher incomes, and greater opportunities. However, that assumption is no longer guaranteed, since many young Australians face higher housing costs, larger debts, slower wage growth, and increased competition from AI technologies that are squeezing the job market. This, of course, does not mean Australia is failing. Far from it. But it does mean that maintaining prosperity has become harder than ever. And that's an important distinction. Building wealth is one challenge, but preserving it is another. Despite the challenges, there are reasons for optimism. Australia still possesses enormous strengths in the form of world-class universities, abundant energy resources, critical minerals needed for future technologies, strong institutions, a highly educated workforce, and perhaps most importantly, Australia still has time. The country is not facing economic collapse, political breakdown, or social chaos. However, Australia still faces problems that are significant but manageable. If policymakers can improve housing supply, encourage innovation, boost productivity, and invest wisely in the future, Australia's best years may still lie ahead. So, is Australia still the lucky country? The answer is yes, but perhaps not in the way many people think. Australia remains one of the most fortunate nations on Earth, and its geography, resources, institutions, and quality of life remain extraordinary. The real question is whether Australia can convert that luck into long-term prosperity, because luck can create opportunities, but it cannot guarantee success forever. Donald Horne's warning from 1964 still echoes today. A nation may be able to live off good fortune for a very long time, but eventually, every lucky country must decide whether it wants to rely on luck or build something even greater. Do you think Australia is still the lucky country? Let us know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and join us for more discussions on geopolitics, economics, and the forces shaping our world. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.